How Do I Music? A podcast by Well Nice Music.
If I'm looking at a timeline for any artist of any level, the first thing I look at is when, when is Easter? When is Great Escape? When is Glastonbury Festival? When is the month where France shuts down for their summer holidays? When is Thanksgiving? Yes. When does the music industry stop for Christmas? And it's really interesting because you start to see patterns in timeline structure.
Hello and welcome to How Do I Music, the Not Boring Industry podcast. That's the tagline. Have we achieved it? You can tell us on socials. It's at Well Nice Music and at How Do I Music. You can also check out our wicked roster of independent talent at wellnicemusic.com. But anyway, we're joined this week by Martha Cleary, a seasoned artist manager, strategist, and founder of Glow Artists. She has helped shape the journeys of many careers so far with Grammy-nominated album campaigns in her locker already. We get into the real pros and cons of independent versus signing with a label, breaking down what actually moves the needle in a campaign, money, timing, or strategy. This episode is jam-packed full of great tips, so you don't want to miss out. And I know that she does a good job of delivering it in a way that is not boring. So now the pressure, it really is on me to interview in a way that's not boring. So it's your judgment to make. Let's go find out. Let's not waste any time. I will see you on the other side. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the episode. We'll kick things off. So, name and occupation.
So my name is Martha Cleary and I run Glow Artists, which is a management and PR company.
Last time music moved you, made you cry or dance?
I was watching the Stevie Van Zandt documentary on Now TV on Sunday night. And I may have been a little bit hungover as well, but there was an entire story in there about No Surrender, which I realised as him and Bruce Springsteen were telling the story that I was just silently crying listening to. So when I was looking at these questions earlier, I was like, oh, I should say one of my artists, or, because their music does move me. And then I realised, no, that was the last time I cried at Bruce Springsteen song.
Well, there's plenty of time for plugging. You can plug Bruce Springsteen as well, but maybe he doesn't need it so much. All-time favourite album? I know this is a tough one. Annoying question.
So I have like 5 albums in my car at any one time. And most of them I've had in there for the better part of the last 10 years. Right. So I'm just going to pick one of them and go with Lord's Melodrama because I think it's a pretty perfect album.
Nice. And last song you listened to?
I actually, while I was preparing to come on this call, Questlove had posted a video. This is a cop-out answer, I'll say in advance. Questlove had posted this video that was a mashup of all of the number ones from, I think it was like 2010 to 2019. So I got about halfway through that mashup. So when I looked at the questions, I was like, the last song I was listening to was technically like 3 seconds of every song released. I think I got as far as Robin Thicke, Blurred Lines, and I was like, no, I can't listen to this.
I'm done with this.
Yeah.
Obviously, the subject matter on that one is questionable as well, has not aged well. Explain what you do in 3 words.
Management, promotion, third word, my gut instinct was to say hustling, but that's a bit of a wanky word to use. There's an awful lot of talking involved in my job, I would say. But management and promotion are obviously the 2 key ones. And then around that, it's all of the other things that managers do. Maybe music should be the third one there, though.
So tell us your story. How did it all begin? Have you always been into music? Can you tell us a bit about your background growing up and describe the moment that you decided to make music a big part of your life and how that progressed into where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, if we can take it all the way back, because probably, I should shout out my mum for bringing me up in a household where music was always present. Like, I'm still not very good with silence, but it was never a factor. I'm named after a Tom Waits song. I used to listen to, there was a Chet Baker tape that I would go to sleep to, which the songs of Chet Baker sings still make me a little bit sleepy to this day. And then that kind of just paved the way for, I remember being a kid and like dancing around the room to the Pogues, and then like discovering my own music and having my own Avril Lavigne phase, and then moving into kind of teenage years. And I was like, even then I was a bit of an emo kid who had like a pop fan alter ego. Around this time, so when I was 14 or 15, I got a job working Saturdays at Chelmsford HMV, which was like the coolest thing I could possibly do, essentially. I was the youngest person they'd ever employed, and it was until, I started working at True Thoughts, it was the coolest job I'd ever had. And then I was doing that, and I just wanted to live out my high fidelity fantasies, basically. Like, when I wasn't working at HMV, I volunteered at a Oxfam bookshop that had a music section, and I did this whole school newspaper thing, and I would write for friends' blogs. And then I went to university. I moved down to Brighton, partially because there was a great live music scene, and because I was doing all of this in my spare time, because to my mind, and this is partly why I enjoy having these conversations and speaking to students and kind of lifting the curtain behind the music industry, because at that point in my life, I was 18, and I didn't think it was possible for me to work in music. Like, my mum was a social worker. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anyone. That's the bottom line. So I moved to Brighton, and I was studying politics, philosophy, and economics, because I was like, that will get me a job. And I'm really bad at making decisions. So I chose a degree where I was doing multiple different things. And while I was studying, I had a show on the university radio, and I wrote for friends' music blogs, and I went to a lot of gigs. I got work experience at NME magazine at the same summer that I got work experience at a think tank. And then when I left, I couldn't more have been living this dual life where it was like, okay, this is what I should be doing, and this is what I want to do. And then when I left, I got a job working in political lobbying and like corporate PR. And I took it, and I hated it. And I used to use up my time off. I'd done a memory tape, which used to be a feature on when Lauren Laverne had the mid-morning show on BBC Six Music. She had a feature called Memory Tapes, and I did that. And then as soon as I had the producer's email, I was like, what else can I do? Can I come in? Can I do work experience? I'm volunteering my time. And shout out to that producer, because he said, okay, fine, like, come in, sit in on a show one day, see how it all kind of comes together. And then from that, I did like a Six Music, a live at Maida Vale Day. And then me and my mum went on Stephen Mack's shows as local listeners. And I started like utilizing as many of these contacts as I could, and as much time off as I could take to do. I'd been volunteering for Great Escape Festival since I was at university. I was doing more of that. And I basically got to a point where I left that job after a year, and there was no love lost there. We were both happy to be parting ways. And then a job at True Thoughts came up. So at this point, I was working in London. I was living back in Essex, and a job at a record label in Brighton came up as a press and radio officer. So at this point, I'd like gained all this kind of corporate PR experience. I'd blagged my way into radio enough times. And also the joke I always make is that political lobbying and radio plugging, very, very old professions, which rely on a contact database, and utilizing those contacts for your client. It's less sleazy when that's happening in politics, when it's happening in music, than when it's happening. But that's the reality of what's going on. So I started working at True Thoughts, doing press and radio, and I loved it. It was
totally.
I was at the label for nearly 7 years, and I realized at some point, probably it started around 2021, I had more of an interest in the duty of care I had for the artist than I did for promoting the label. There was a week where I had a bad day at work. Like, it was just a bad day at work where I thought, I can't have any more bad days at work. Like, I don't want to be doing this anymore.
Yeah.
And then the next day, Moonchild, who I'd been working with, got nominated for a Grammy.
Nice.
And then the next day, which, you know, that happened, and I'd been being scolded for kind of going after the bigger things.
Right.
So like pushing for Grammy, to put things forward for Grammys, or pushing for doing Record Store Day, or like, you know, I was thinking too big.
Yeah.
And then when that email came through the next day, my boss was like, "Oh, ignore those emails I sent you yesterday." I'm kind of like, well, the damage is done now.
Yeah,
like
sure.
I that was it. And then it was just one of those weeks. The next day, Sly Fifth Ave played a sold out show at Ronnie Scott's, and I said to him, "You know, I'm not happy." And he was like, "Well, I'm all in. Like, if you go, I'm sticking with you."
Yeah, great.
And then the next day, someone else rang me who runs a management company, and they were like, "Oh, by the way, you know, I just wanted to have a chat with you because if you ever wanted a change of career, I'd love for you to come and run the company with me."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, well, weirdly enough, in the last couple of months, I've sort of promised that I'll do this for other people if I'll leave. But that's good that you see that I could be doing that.
Yeah.
So that was in the November, and by the February, I handed my notice in. And that is a very long story to how I started.
This is exactly no. That's a good story. That's exactly what we wanted. That is, it's good to know the route, and it's interesting because everyone's route is completely different, and it's interesting for you that you came from such a different background originally. Like, you always knew music was part of the plan, but also you had this very academic and political road you were keeping alongside. I think it's interesting what you said about, you know, aiming too high or, you know, being told you're aiming too high. And sometimes I feel maybe it depends where you work and who you're working with completely. But when you're left and you're your own boss and the project's direction is down to you, you can make mistakes or take punts quicker because there isn't this kind of bureaucratic kind of way of doing things, or it hasn't got to be approved by people who are senior to you. And sometimes I think that making punts and making mistakes quicker, or just trialing something out, is part of the process and can be done pretty quickly and pretty harmlessly, even if nothing comes of it and it doesn't cost too much time. Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of my best and worst qualities because I can get stuff done very quickly, but also sometimes I have to remind myself that it's okay to take a beat.
Yeah.
And to really like look at, and you know, we're all different. Like, I was speaking to another manager the other day who's the opposite. You know, he was like, "I'm too cautious and I wish I was more reactive." And I think that having to kind of square it with myself that, okay, you can email all of these people and ask all of these questions or do these things or put this out there, but if it comes back, you've only got yourself to blame. and it's like, I think I've just recognized that, like, I'm happy to kind of take that if it then means that, you know, one time out of 20 it might work out. And I also think that kind of like thick skin, I suppose, is necessary. But any PR or any radio plugger will tell you that, you know, when people don't reply to their emails, it doesn't bother them. Like, the difficult thing is when my friends don't reply to my texts and I still text them 10 times in a day because I'm like, well, just following up here. What I'm
Looping back.
But I do think that thing of seeing the big picture without necessarily, with having the focus only on the artist and what's best for their bigger plan, rather than you know, this is what's good for the artist. but does that necessarily fit into what's good for the label? And I think, I think indie labels are incredibly important. And they play a huge role, particularly in the sort of UK, like indie soul jazz scene. But I think they exist almost on a basis of being run by respected tastemakers and having a brand in themselves, because if they don't have that as a label, then they can't sign smaller acts. But then I think at the same time it can be tricky, when you're looking at the artist's fate in those labels. It can be tricky to then, when an artist begins to grow beyond that. I work with a lot of independent artists now, and one of my favorite things is that a release structure isn't dictated by other releases or a label's timeline. It's dictated by what we want to do and how we want to do it. So that's also really nice for me, because I've spent a long time thinking about thinking about the best ways to release music, or ways I'd want to experiment it with doing so. And you can't do that as much within a label. But I learned an awful lot there, and I wouldn't be here without it. So
we're in an era where obviously revenue streams and catalog, it kind of works for a lot of record labels who have been around for a long time, with just receiving streaming royalties on music they released 20 years ago. But if you don't own vast amount of catalog, the revenue streams seem to be diminishing. So when you're planning a release strategy for an act now, what are you looking to prioritize, and how does that differ to your days at a record label? You engaging more with social media? Is that now a much bigger part of your plan? How do you kind of plan out an album release now as a manager?
If I'm looking at a timeline for any artist of any level, the first thing I look at is when is Easter? When is Great Escape? When is Glastonbury Festival? When is the month where France shuts down for their summer holidays? When is Thanksgiving? Yes. When does the music industry stop for Christmas? And it's really interesting because you start to see patterns in timeline structure. In the same way with, I think it's the same in like the publishing world as well. I spoke to someone recently who was told like their book couldn't come out around Christmas because Cher's book was coming out around Christmas, and publishers don't want to be competing. There was Sly Fifth Ave, an artist I manage, his album came out this year on the 22nd of March. I'm pretty sure there were about 15 fairly big albums that came out on the 22nd of March. And it's often you find that like the third Friday of March and the third Friday of October are just big release days because of how the year falls and kind of how you put that structure together. So I suppose looking at the year as a whole is the first thing I do. And then looking at the project and kind of what we want to pull out of that project, what content is around it. I say to any artist who is an independent artist, particularly artists who are just starting out, and maybe they don't have a lot of like financial backing or money at their disposal, it's just about making as much as you can with what you've got. So if you're an artist signed to a label, it might be that the label say, we've got room to do 3 singles and then the album, and that's your album campaign, and it lasts 3 to 4 months. And then you move on, or they move on, you don't move on. Whereas if you're an independent artist, and this is something that I did with like Miranda Joan and her album Overstimulated, I think in the end we did something like 7 singles across a year and a half. There might not be that many, actually. It's only an 11-track album. But we did quite a lot of singles because partly it was because that's how, she was finishing 1 track at a time. And partly also it was like, people don't know you. She put an album out previously, but she didn't have much of a profile over here, especially. So it was like with every single, people are going to have more name recognition, know what to expect, be looking forward to it, and also see that it's part of a bigger plan and a bigger structure. I think picking those singles, deciding how many there's going to be, spreading it out, following all the kind of rules, which is that you don't want to put 2 singles less than 3 weeks together because it impacts streaming, playlist pitching, and you want to factor in that maybe one song will do really well, so you'll have more time to kind of keep pushing that song. And I think also, in terms of your point with social media, something that I've really recognized from a management perspective more than a label perspective, and I kind of hinted hinted at it a minute ago, is that you know, an album campaign doesn't stop when the album comes out. So it's also that thing of kind of saying, okay, this is the body of work, but then how are we going to make this your entire personality for a year? Because we don't want to be sitting on a catalog album in 3 years time. We want this to have a moment now. And some of that is like Sly Fifth Ave recorded a series of sort of short piece to camera snippets talking about every track on the album and his process making that. So then that was about cutting them down and rolling that out on socials and rolling it out on YouTube, and just again going back to that thing of okay, we've got an album and then we've got like 4 videos and then we've got these piece to camera videos and then we've got the lyrics and then we've got some fun merch and then maybe there's a few live shows, and it's now from a label perspective to a management perspective, it is about going like, okay, how do we extend that timeline and fill as much time as we need to fill and as much time as there's appetite for us to fill as well.
Do you feel like the role of the album is diminishing or is going to stay significant? Because obviously, as we know, with streaming platforms, and it's all they're song-based platforms. You're getting recommended things on a song-based format all the time. How do you see the role of an album for your artists? Is it something that you feel is significant as landmarks in their growth, or how do you see that format evolving?
I think albums are still important, and I think they still hold weight, especially for as long as the industry dictates they hold weight for. You know, it's that thing where it's like, okay, an artist is making an album. Who are they making that album for? Is it that they're making it for themselves because it's a conceptual piece and it needs to be this many tracks? Is it because they're making it for a label who wants to say that they're putting an album out? Or for the critics that care more about albums than they do about standalone singles or EPs.
Sure.
And I think especially with the types of artists that I work with, you know, they're all more thoughtful in their work, too thoughtful to put out. Like, I had an artist the other day, Miranda sent me there's just this fun dancey track that's just silly and it doesn't belong in her catalogue. But we were laughing about the idea of putting it out just randomly. And she was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to put a track out as if I'm trying to have a TikTok moment, or, you know, I don't want to put a track out and then detract from this jazz EP that I'm working on next. So I think like in terms of the artists that I work with, the album will still carry that weight. I think it's important for artists to play around with release structure though, because often they can rush into doing an album, and it goes back to that thing that I was saying about doing, 6 singles. If people don't know who you are, introduce yourself again and again and again until the idea of your debut album holds some more weight in their minds.
Essentially, we've reached a point where an album, it's really hard to break an artist to, make an album make significant amounts of money, especially, if in the indie scene, even if you're getting signed to a decent label, there's quite often it takes quite a while before you even break even with significant amounts of investment and the album's done quite well. And I think with that, you're getting a bit of a shift over what the role is in terms of releasing music. And I saw an interesting article about how the music industry could learn a lot from sports industries in terms of monetizing super fans, and how, content is basically just, as sad as it is, because we don't want to move away and just lose albums as an art form, because they're such an amazing thing. And it's really sad that these are the conversations we're having to have. However, we're going to have them anyway. You're now basically seeing music almost being utilized as a way to monetize other like merchandise and tours and all of this. The final product of music consumption and listening being the moneymaker. We've kind of moved beyond that point now, and it's how can we use our music to turn these people into super fans that will then buy stuff on a more significant value than just playing my stuff on Spotify. And that's an interesting place to be. But it's also, I think it's quite, hopeful to make comparisons to the sports industries, because if you work from their formats, they're not doing badly either. And there are so many ways you can monetize a fan base if they're really enthused by what you do. And, doing drops that are seasonal or location based for your fans. I think there are lots of revenue streams that you can learn as an artist manager from other industries, even if it feels like banging your head against the wall sometimes with Spotify or whatever.
Oh god, yeah. But I think also it's about, and I and you see this with you see this in the sports world, and especially in like football and stuff as well. It's like it's that idea of giving people access to a lifestyle to some extent. And I think working out what your artist, intending on this sounding as not, I don't want this to sound cold, I suppose is what I'm getting at. But like, so Sly Fifth Ave has been living in Mexico City for a few years now, is about to move to LA. But with this album, there was, it was kind of like, right, what are we going to do content wise around it? And I'm a human who likes to talk a lot. Like, I love New York. I love the busyness of the city and its iconicness. So Sly was going to be in New York, and I was like, he'd lived there for 12 years. And I said, like, let's do the music video here. You go around to all of your spots and it tells the story of your life here, but also immediately then, and shout out to Gigi Nettles, who did the music video for that, because he did a great job. But what you get watching that video is you're like, oh, I want to be at a jazz club in New York. And so then, and Sly is that person. Sly is also a geek who just, loves orchestral arrangements and the intricacies of jazz music. But what you see when you go on his social media is very much that. That's who you're following, and that's who you're like listening to, and that's who you're getting tickets to go and see. And it is that thing of going, okay, this is the music, and the music is quality, but what are people buying into around that?
We have a tradition, shall we say? I guess it's too early for a tradition, but for you to recommend someone who would be worth a conversation, who else in the industry do you think has a story to tell that's worth telling, and we should reach out to potentially get onto the show? They could be a pipe dream. They don't even have to be a friend. You can really set me up to try and get someone.
Track someone down.
Yeah.
No, I think one of the unsung heroes, and she is a friend, so I'm allowed to say this. One of the unsung heroes of the sort of UK like broadcast network, I suppose, is Shola, who produces Lauren Avern's show, produces the Breakfast Show on Six Music. I think Shola is incredible. She's worked in the industry for a long time. She worked in studios before she worked in radio. She's also behind some of Six Music's like best features or specialist programming, and has some wonderful stories. And as her friend, I think she doesn't give herself enough of a pat on the back sometimes.
Oh, great.
So she was the first person that came to mind.
Nice. Well, Shola, if you're listening. What about projects that haven't gone as planned in your career, or if that's too difficult, maybe some common mistakes that you see artists make in their campaigns?
There have definitely been campaigns that I, wanted to go better. I think the interesting thing from a PR perspective is that you're listening to this album and you're writing the press release and you're in this world of the story of whatever the artist has put together. And you start really believing in it. not that you didn't at first, but you're like, yeah, actually, and this could work, and maybe we could do this, and it's always been, I've always hated it when that doesn't quite connect. Which is, of course, you wouldn't you? Like there was a band that was signed to True Thoughts called The Session, who I played them to someone the other day, and they were like, "Isn't this Hiatus Coyote?" And I was like, "Exactly." But no, Little Dragon is who they sound exactly like, and that was the issue. They sounded so much like Little Dragon.
Yeah.
And they did 2 great albums, and it just didn't land. There was another band called Space Captain, who were a US band, who I really, really loved, but they sat in this weird space between sort of like dream pop and jazz and soul. And again, like no one really knew where to put them. So I would say probably that, like very broadly, those are, particularly in the soul, R&B, jazz space, I think the trickiest things for artists are to, on one hand, pick a lane and do it really well, in terms of genre and sound, and trying to reference other artists while also staying true to who you are as an artist. But then on the flip side of that as well, like you don't want to sound bland, you don't want to sound like insipid or boring or like lift
Anyone
music.
else?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which the amount of times that I've heard people tell me that like neo soul is just lift music, and it's like, it's not, it's done well. That's the point.
Yeah.
So I guess that thing of trying to like define yourself whilst taking those influences so you're accessible and people know what box to put you in, but without making it too broad that people either don't connect with it at all or don't know where to put you. And I think that's a really, really hard thing for artists to do. Yeah.
I think it's interesting what you touched on there when, people saying that about neo soul. I think there was a time in the late 2010s where it just became so oversaturated. It became very trendy. Colors, Tiny Desk was full of, those are neo soul. And now, but that just happens within music, and you have to get there before people get bored of it. And I think, if you are someone in that lane, because I think we're getting to a point, maybe we haven't got there yet, but that kind of post-punk sound that is everywhere all the time now. That feels like it. And then there was 2000s indie where you'd get another bunch of white guys called the Somethings, and that was just everywhere for so long. I think this just happens in music, and then people's patience for it, people love it for a bit, and then they just get bored because it's everywhere. And maybe that was the case to some people's ears. They're just like, oh, I've heard too much of this in a short space of time for me to move on. And I think that can happen, and it's a fairly natural response.
Exactly what you're saying. I remind myself that these things come in waves, and that also chances are, if you're noticing a trend like that, it's probably too late to start making music in that way. And it's just about kind of, if you do the same thing long enough, then eventually there'll be an appetite for that.
What does a typical day look like for you now? Do you have a routine? Is it even possible to have a routine as a campaign manager, an artist manager?
Yes, because if I didn't have a routine, then I think I would have gone mad by now.
Good answer.
I love routine. I love order. I received some funding earlier this year from the Music Managers Forum as part of the Accelerator program.
Oh, wow.
And partly with that funding, I have been able to afford office space, which is incredible. It involves kind of going there, and I try and structure my days pretty diligently in terms of having a work-life balance. That doesn't always work. My friends are very, very patient people. My loved ones are very patient people. But I think also it's different when you're doing it for yourself than when you're doing it for someone else. I think people you know, if you're staying working late because your boss has made you, then there's like immediately everyone's like, oh, that's awful. How could they do that to you? Whereas if you're saying, no, I'm still working because I want to get this done, because then it'll be easier for me tomorrow, or because I need to get this done because otherwise I'll miss this deadline, or, you know, I'm quite good at kind of holding that together and structuring that and pacing that out. I also make a lot of lists. I have multiple notebooks that are just
They're
full
my
of
life. Yeah, I can't. Well, I can't start a day without actually just planning out a list. Otherwise it's just too random, and I get distracted by random other job that's popped into my head for 10 minutes, and I'm like, oh wait, I was meant to be finishing this press release or whatever.
Exactly. Like, it's bad enough when, I mean, the amount of times today alone that I opened Instagram to do something work related and then was like down a rabbit hole 2 minutes later and was like, what was I doing right now? So yeah, making lists, calendars, Google Calendar, written calendar, the snooze function on Outlook, which has been my favorite discovery of the year. Yeah, I try and keep as much order as possible, because I think if all of the things I can control are, you know, met with some sort of structure, then all of the unpredictability of working in music, there's sort of space for that.
Are you using AI in your work? And if so, how? Are you anti-AI generally? What are your feelings?
I am not a big user of AI, is the short answer. I haven't played around with ChatGPT. I used the AI function on LinkedIn the other day to rewrite a post, and I didn't like it anymore. I think, and I, you know, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, but I think as someone who has been, I believe when I'm writing a press release or a bio or even a promo email, I would love to be able to rely on AI to do those things for me, because they are time consuming things. But the reason they are time consuming is because I want to get them right. And I feel as though if you are promoting an artist's album or release or story in any capacity, they've done the hard work then, and they're trusting you with how you're bringing that to a wider audience. And I've read press releases that I believe to be written by AI, and they are lists of facts, and they have no like sense of, I don't know, storytelling. Not you know, all the time, but I think you miss out on that kind of human aspect of it, I suppose. I haven't totally closed the door in my mind to using AI. I want to look more into using AI to do like lyric videos or, you know, content in general, because, you know, I think that's something where it's probably just easier. But yeah, in a big way.
I think with copywriting specifically, I've noticed I got very excited at the start because I was like, oh, I can just use ChatGPT to essentially finish my PR sheets for me. And what I realized very quickly when doing this is that there were just certain key terms that you can spot. And like when people weren't AI literate and knew how ChatGPT was speaking, I think there was probably a month grace period where you probably could get away with a ChatGPT press release. Now you're probably just offending anybody that reads this by going, okay, well, if you don't have the time to actually pitch this to me properly, then why should I write about this or play it? You know, you're probably just burning connections and doing more harm.
Oh, totally.
The one thing I do find it useful for in some sort of middle ground is that I can just chuck out a load of key points. If I'm creating copy, I would just be like, right, these are all, here's a press release I've written before that is fully done by me, and learn the tone structure, blah, blah, blah. And then it learns the tone and structure, blah, blah, blah. Then I just give it all the key format points or points I want to make and just word vomit without thinking too much. And then especially when describing the track even and that kind of thing as well, I can just blah, blah, blah. And then it'll structure things in a way. But I'll still spend about 45 minutes editing the damn thing afterwards. So it doesn't speed the thing, it doesn't really speed the process up at all. But I try and incorporate it in my work as much as I can, just because I think it's going to be it's going to evolve and get better and better, and I just want to be good at prompting throughout my career. And because I don't know, that feels like it's just going to be a skill that people want, so I try and just incorporate it. It's good for cooking.
Yeah, that is something that I've realized. And also I've got the Google AI function turned on at the moment, and I am enjoying the idea that I Google something and it pulls lots of different websites together, especially if you're having a moment of like health anxiety or something. It's like, oh, for exploring all the potential possibilities. But I was listening to a podcast the other day actually, and they were talking about AI within journalism, and they were saying about like newer employees relying on it so much versus, you know, older employees who might not be using it at all. And I think the point that they made, and I guess this is probably my attitude on it, is kind of similar to what you were just saying, which is that I think there is a use for it, and I think it's an important thing to explore and play with. However, the idea of anyone kind of coming into a creative industry, and I take journalism or music copy and PR and stuff as part of that.
Totally.
The idea of people coming into that and not knowing the pain of having to sit down and like figure out, you know, why is it jazz tinged? What are the synths doing there? Describe this story of how this person meeting this person impacted this track without just telling a life story. You know, I think all of those skills are really important beyond just being able to put words on a page. And I think the idea of people kind of coming in and just going, well, here's everything an artist has told me, I'll shove it into ChatGPT, and then I've got a press release.
A key component of your job at that point is actually being the filter in that story and working out the good bits that is worth support on the other end, rather than just hoping that ChatGPT is going to fill out the rest for you. Do you have a dream project or collaboration that you would like to take on at Glow? Is there any bucket list things that you have in mind for the future?
Keep doing what I'm doing, but on a slightly larger scale. But that is a very wishy-washy broad answer. The reality is that I've got a few dream projects up my sleeve, which are like, I only tell people about in order to slightly manifest them, or, you know, to hold myself accountable to the fact that I want to do these things. So one of them is the fact that so Sly Fifth Ave did a thing a couple of years ago now with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra and Questlove. Basically, the Dallas Symphony Orchestra has done a few of these orchestral renditions of someone's back catalogue, particularly people who are from Texas or have connections to Texas, and Sly is from Dallas. So Sly did the arrangements and conducted the orchestra alongside Questlove, and it was an incredible thing for him to do. And I have this like pipe dream of finally getting in touch with Megan Thee Stallion's management, because she is also from Texas. And I think talk about tiny desks. Megan Thee Stallion's Tiny Desk with Phony People is my favorite ever. I think I watched that daily during the pandemic. I think she's obviously become a super duper huge like rap pop star, but I think actually like on a hip hop level, she's still kind of like underappreciated, and maybe people see her more like in a tokenistic way. But I have this whole thing of like, I think it would be incredible for Sly and the Dallas Symphony Orchestra to reorchestrate her back catalogue and to perform that live in Texas. So that's my like, that's not really about Glow. That's just one very specific project for a specific artist that I'm speaking into existence any opportunity I get. But I suppose on a less specific level, you know, I want to see all of my artists get to a point where they're kind of earning enough money from the music that they're making, Obviously, I have a vested interest in that. That means that I am earning more money. But, Bryony is about to write her third album. Stephen is working on his second album. Miranda has been on tour with the Killers for the last year and a half. So she's coming off that to work on other projects. I'm speaking to other acts about taking them on for management. I've been working with a few independent acts on a retainer. And I suppose looking forward, I would like to be able to employ someone else to work alongside me and grow the roster. That's the broad thing. I think that my ethos with Glow is just to work with integrity, which is one of those things that people say and then they're offered loads of money. It's like, oh, it didn't matter that much, but I think there is a fair way of working in this industry, and I'm determined to find it and live it out. And I think that idea of fairness and integrity is something that I hope to carry forward whilst also growing the business side of things.
So there's an artist that I really, really like, and genuinely one of her songs, I think she knows this anyway, but one of her songs is like my favorite song of the year. I've rinsed it all year. And she's not very big. We've kind of toyed with the idea of managing her, but realistically, I'm at the moment got to prioritize the projects that are actually paying, and it would be a lot of time spent to grow an artist. And I have no doubt that her ceiling is way up here. She's incredible. But we're toying up the passion projects, which is why we're here in the first place, and then also the projects that just kind of be like, oh, actually, do I want to take that on when I've got so much other stuff to do that will probably be more rewarding in terms of putting money in my pocket. It's a bit of a balancing act at times, I think.
Oh my God, it's such a balancing act. I previously managed an artist who, I really believed in and still do. Although we haven't particularly spoken since I said that I wouldn't be working with her anymore.
Yeah.
But the reality was, and her label rang me up after this and said, there's no money there. And I was like, there's no money there. She was grouping on all of her projects, but then at the same time, she also wanted to speak on the phone every few days. And there was a lot of I want to do this and I want to do this and I want to do that. And it was like, that's all fine.
Yeah.
But if I worked it out, I've probably made like £2 a week managing you.
Yeah.
And that's just not sustainable. And it's also, it was also partly it's number one, it's partly why I still do the promo on the side. Like, I enjoy freelance press and radio because I get to work with artists that otherwise I wouldn't necessarily get to work with. I work with some artists on a retainer, so I don't manage them formally, but I take them on for a campaign, and it means they have me at their disposal and I do all the promo stuff.
Yeah.
Which again is like guaranteed income. But, on a purely kind of like financially sensible side of things, it was also why I was comfortable taking on the artists that are signed to the label I used to work for, because I know their accounts intimately. I've studied their statements every statement period. I know what costs have gone on there, what advances have gone on there, and the rate at which they're likely to recoup. So I think management is really hard because there have been so many times where I've wanted to manage artists, even in the last 2+ years. But you just have to at some point say, like, this won't make financial sense to me. But again, going right back to my roots of how I ended up here, I worked for a startup public affairs and corporate PR firm. And their thing was that they worked with bigger clients so that they could then afford to work with at least one, if not more, pro bono client and offer free PR to charities or whatever. And I'm not calling any artist a charity case, but that is, I think, something that I take with how I look at the sort of financial structure of Glow. It's like, well, if I'm And it was also the case when I was working full time at True Thoughts and then spending my evenings working with independent artists. It's like I've got someone covering my salary, which therefore means that I can offset those costs by doing this for less or for free. But within that, I, have learned that, or I already knew it. I've just come face to face with the fact that within that, you still have to be savvy with who that is. And if it feels as though, there are some artists that I work with on retainer and I've seen them grow and it's been incredible. And to that, I'm like, cool, this is the right person to be helping because they've got the other bits that contribute to growth of an artist. And then sometimes you can kind of do all the same things for another act and either, they don't match it with the same energy or it's not met with the same appreciation or whatever, something else happens on the other end. And I think it's also a bit about knowing when to say when.
Yeah, it is an interesting one because you end up saying the things that you always thought you were against as a kid, how prioritizing money over the art and stuff. And then but then you also realize that is your job. They can be the artist. It's the artist's job to be idealistic. That's patronizing as hell, but but follow the creative vision and then you can be the ruthless, this is how we make money.
Yeah. And I mean, and sometimes also that can be as simple as going, but why can't I perform this with a 5 to 9 piece band and say, because you're only getting paid £200? It's sometimes it's not being the big bad wolf. It's about kind of, reminding them of the reality. I would love to get to a place where it's like, it's a no-brainer that my artists are getting offered fees that they can then afford an orchestra, but they're not there yet. And in the meantime, we have to get creative. And I think in a lot of ways, working on a budget and having to get creative can be a lot of fun as well. And a lot of good things come out of that.
To any artists who are managing themselves listening, what are some quick catch-all tips that you could give someone?
Be clever when you're mapping out your timeline. Be realistic when you're mapping out your timeline as well. Because if you are emailing press people or radio people and you say that your EP or album is coming out on this date, and then you had to move it 3 times because actually you couldn't afford the mastering, so it had to be nudged back again, that's fine, but be realistic about that. Whilst also taking note of, the music industry shutting down at Christmas. France doesn't exist in August. Spotify wants you to have X amount of weeks between each release, blah, 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 blah. And then I think just on a more practical level, don't be afraid to email, to DM, but also if you're going to Instagram DM anyone in this industry, finish that DM by saying, what's your email? And I'll send it to you there, because Instagram does not lend itself for music promo. Instagram notifications disappear after a while. And also it's just the most chaotic way of communicating with people regarding business. But I think, don't be afraid to track those people down. A lot of email addresses are either guessable or available online. And just ask, just throw it out there. If you are pitching yourself to management, to labels, to radio, to press, to bookers, to artists whose gigs you want to support, think about what links you're sending is my biggest bit of advice. Always send a private streaming link that isn't going to expire. And that means a SoundCloud or a disco link, not a Spotify or an Apple, because the person you're sending it to might not use that service, etc., etc. So a private streaming link that isn't going to expire, and send a Dropbox or a Google folder with your audio files, any edits, and any other information you want to be sending, and just make it as easy as possible for the people on the other end to access that. Tap into any kind of musical communities or connections. There are some great, particularly women in music, She Said So is an incredible worldwide community. The MMF for managers does an awful lot and is worth being a part of. But also just if you're friends with someone whose producer works with someone else, maybe save it for the right time, but don't be afraid to use those connections. If you know a band is playing in your hometown and you want to support them, message that person or find their manager and message them. Like, I think those are my two overarching pieces of advice. Don't be afraid to ask or chase or get in touch with people while still respecting all of their personal boundaries. And then at the same time, when you do that, just make sure your information is as concise as possible and as accessible as possible. And I will keep shouting about those two things.
And I guess these tips completely extend to people who are working and aspiring to have roles in the industry as well. You know, if you're ever working with music and pitching music, these still, whoever you are, these rules still apply.
Yeah. Like, I got to where I am being a bit of a gobshite and always asking people for opportunities and questions. And like, if I didn't understand something, I found the person and I asked what it was.
Yeah.
Like, because the worst thing that can happen is someone might not reply to you. And that's really not that bad.
Talk about a song that we should play out to and why is it so good, assuming you like it.
Oh, that was such bad timing. So the fun thing is, this should just stop in a minute.
I think, well, I'm quite keen to keep that in the edit because it's quite funny and sort of podcast.
This is the song that I want to close.
Fire and Sam.
The worst part is, like, it's just like, hang on, I'm just going to mute myself for a second.
All right, okay.
Okay, final song that isn't the fire alarm. I feel like I have to pick one of the artists that I work with for this because
you've got to, yeah.
Otherwise it would be a really missed opportunity to do some promo. But as I'm saying that, I can't decide which artist should have the opportunity.
Favoritism.
It's like having to pick between my children, I suppose. So on one hand, I would like to shout out Stephen Bamadelli and his album Summing Up, Bryony Jarman Pinto and her album Below Dawn, and Miranda Joan and her album Overstimulated. Please go and listen to all of those records, because when I say that I am lucky to work with such talented people, I really truly mean that. Three of the most like beautiful voices but also talented songwriters that I know of, and obviously I'm biased, but it's true. I think a song to play out to should be the song that I've been making assets for and sending emails about all day today, which is Sly Fifth Ave and the title track from his album Liberation.
Thank you so much, Martha. Thanks for coming on. Thank you so much to Martha Cleary for coming on the episode, especially loving that fire alarm going off at the end. Maybe that's a lesson in expecting the unexpected. It was all intentional. We got you. No, but it's not really. But yeah, if you enjoyed that, then we've got plenty more coming. So please do rate the podcast, do like it. It really does make a difference. And I'm sure you're bored of hearing that from every other podcast. So please, if you do it, then I'll probably still carry on blogging you, but I might do it less. No promises. But anyway, thank you so much. And yeah, we've got plenty more coming. So stay tuned and I'll catch you next time.
How Do I Music? A podcast by Well Nice Music.